hear me all right? I want to thank Conrad and Jody and the rest of Soma for being as open-minded as you were. We would like to talk about naturalism, most of which you haven't heard of. I hope by the end of the talk you'll consider yourself a naturalist, in the sense that I'm going to discuss today.
Put it higher.
Now, if there's... Can you hear me okay? Fine. Not really?
How's this? Okay, now we're getting some amplification. All right, I'll stand conveniently next to the podium for the duration. Stay out of the way on the slides. That's always helpful. But if there's something more delicate and difficult to discuss than sex, what could it be? Politics. People raise their hands quite readily on matters of sexuality. Who will dare to identify themselves as a conservative? Would you please raise your hand?
What issue?
You've got just one. Okay, now who would identify themselves as, say, a progressive or liberal?
Yeah, what issue?
We'll get there. Okay, terrific. So today's crowd is going to be a very easy sell for naturalism. Now, I'm going to advance the slide. I can go do this. The first thing we're going to do today. This is all right. First thing we're going to do today is build a worldview. Most of you probably have a worldview, but it's not particularly explicit, right? So we're going to build one today. It's going to be called naturalism, worldview naturalism. All right. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to, after we build naturalism up to a certain extent, we're going to challenge libertarian free will. Something that many of you might think you have, but you don't. Next, we're going to talk about what I think are the progressive implications of naturalism. And we're going to look at social policy and personal applications coming out of those implications, out of worldview naturalism. Then we're going to talk very briefly about existential concerns, the kinds of concerns that religions are usually deal with. I think this is fine. I'll just lean casually on the podium. And then I will admit that naturalism, like all worldviews, including religions, doesn't have answers to all the questions. There are tough questions that naturalism has to deal with, that we have to deal with, that our worldview really can't solve for us. So I don't want to claim too much for naturalism. All right, let's build our worldview. What is a worldview? Again, you may not have one, you may not even need one. If you don't, that's fine. I'm not trying to sell you anything too much. A worldview is the big picture of reality and human nature that puts things in an ultimate context, a cognitive tool that makes sense of our situation and helps guide behavior, both morally and practically. So that's an idea of what a worldview is. I think there are 6 questions that a worldview has to answer, at least 6. These are the basic elements of a worldview. How do we know what's real? That's our epistemology. By the way, I should say that this is going to be a little bit philosophical compared to our last talk, so bear with me. A little bit of a calm down, I'll do my can to spice it up, but know that your minds are going to be, I hope, stretched a bit. Okay, how do we know what's real? That's our epistemology. What exists? That's our metaphysics. Who are we, essentially? That's the question of human nature and human agency. The 3 other questions we have to answer are the following. How ought we behave? That's ethics. How can we best solve our problems? Those are the practical applications. What is it all about? Those are our existential concerns. Now, I would like to say that atheism is not a worldview, nor is reason a worldview. Atheism is the denial of God. Reason is a practical tool, reason of cognition, of logic, of evidence. But let's face it, people use reason all the time to reach false conclusions starting from bad premises, including many who subscribe to religious worldviews. Christianity, Buddhism, and Islam are worldviews, of course. They tell you what exists, who you are, what the meaning of life is, how we should behave. And they also offer practical solutions in life. So what I'm doing today, what I'd like to suggest is an alternative naturalistic worldview naturalism, which says, here's the basics. Nature is what there is, and nature is enough. That's naturalism in a nutshell. And the Center for Naturalism has developed a little tagline. It reads as follows: connection, compassion, and control. The 3 C's. And you'll see how these are developed as we build our worldview. So here's Worldview Naturalism, answering the 6 questions just in a quick series. The details will come up shortly. Our epistemology is empiricism. That means using public evidence the way that science uses it. Our metaphysics is nature. Nature is what exists. There's no evidence for the supernatural. Human nature. Who are we? We are evolved physical creatures completely within nature. That's our connection. That's the connection of the 3 C's. We're connected to nature completely, causally connected. Our ethics is progressive, humanistic, and egalitarian. The top title was from empiricism to equality, right? A grandiose title, but I think a case can be made for this. So that's where compassion comes in, because of our progressive implications of naturalism, as I'll try to show. The practical applications are based on a causal understanding of ourselves, of our human behavior. That gives us control. So we have connection to the natural world, we have compassion, and we have control. And the existential concerns, the answer to the question of what is it all about, has to do with living in a wild universe, an unsupervised universe in which there's no God in charge, as Darrell said, no sky God looking down and supervising things. Okay, so a little bit about epistemology and empiricism. How do we know what we know? That's the question. Well, we know that personal experience, intuition, and faith are pretty unreliable when it comes to deciding matters of fact. So we have to use public evidence, in principle, available to anyone sitting here, to decide what's the case, what's true. This we call empiricism. That's what science generally does. It's observational, right? Get your telescope, microscope, the naked eye. You observe. That's how facts are decided, even if the object of observation is considerably far away or very, very tiny. Take the example of alien abduction. How many have been alien abducted? That was the conservative right there. Okay. All right. How do we know it's true you were abducted? Let's say you claim you have this experience. How do we know you're right? Well, clearly we can't just trust your experience. We would need to see some physical evidence, some corroboration of your experience. Your experience might be completely vivid and real to you, but we wouldn't believe you unless you could give us some public evidence, intersubjective evidence, some empirical evidence attesting to the fact that it actually happened, right? Okay, I hope this is obvious to everybody. This is basically science and science-based disciplines that ask us to be from Missouri. You know the motto of Missouri? The show me state, precisely. So be from Kansas, but you can also be from Missouri. We should rationally be empiricists, that is, use public evidence, exemplified by science, in deciding any question of fact. Science and empiricism, this is a strong claim, have no rivals in giving us reliable factual knowledge. There's just no other way of knowing about the world that can hold a candle to empiricism when it comes to deciding what's true. If you want to stake your life on something, you stick with public evidence, no matter what the question is. There's no factual domain in which faith, intuition, or tradition has special expertise or rationale or credibility. For instance, the nature of reality or the existence of God. Faith, tradition, and intuition have no special credibility or authority in any factual domain. They just can't compete with empiricism. There's no domain I know of in which I would look to faith, tradition, or intuition, gut feelings, as opposed to science. Just tell me what the case is. On the assumption that we want reliable knowledge, we are rational to the empiricists. Hope we're all getting into the empiricist ship here as I speak. I think you're already there. But this is where it is. Reason does come into play. If you want reliable knowledge, on that assumption, it's rational to be an empiricist. So to be an empiricist is also to be epistemically responsible. If you do not use public evidence in deciding what's true in your beliefs, you're really putting other people at risk. It's unethical to base your beliefs on anything but public evidence, especially when it comes to matters of consequence, for instance, climate change, or vaccinations, or birth control, or what causes HIV. Faith and tradition will let you down every time. And it's unethical, it's irresponsible to deal with anything but public evidence when deciding these grave matters of fact. Our metaphysics turning on the question of what exists? Well, science and empiricism provide evidence for the natural world, for nature, a single causally interconnected realm of existence. That's what science shows to exist, and we're all part of it. There's no reliable evidence, on the other hand, for anything supernatural. Gods, ghosts, souls. There's no reason to suppose they exist if you stick with evidence. If you don't, then anything goes, right? The feeling that you might have a soul will probably, if you've been brought up in a religious tradition, very well might trump the lack of evidence on the scientific understanding for, say, the soul or God. Here's an important point. Nothing supernatural plays a role in any evidence-based explanation or scientific theory. You won't find anything spooky or supernatural going on in science, or in any other evidence-based discipline like the law. You might find it in Taoism, right? Or in prayer, hopes and intuitions and wishes, hoping that there's something supernatural playing a role in how things work. But if we're an empiricist, did I get the wrong button? If you're an empiricist, well, we'll try to get this back online, you'll agree that there's nothing supernatural that plays a role in how we know what we know. Explanation. Meanwhile, I have brought with me a paper copy of my talk, which I will get and continue to regale you with. That's what happens if the graphics are too dull. It shuts down. Sorry.
You didn't pray hard enough.
That too. So we were talking about, before we were so technologically interrupted, about nature, what exists. And we decided that nothing supernatural plays a role in any science-based or scientific theory, any evidence-based explanation. So the conclusion, basically, if you stick with science and public evidence, is that nature is what there is. That's a very simple conclusion. It's basically the metaphysical claim of worldview naturalism. Nature is what there is. And I would claim nature is enough. That's what the rest of the talk is going to be dealing with. What we have to understand, though, is I'm making pretty strong claims here. But here's the next slide that you may or may not see, but I'll give you a preview, is about cognitive humility. I could be wrong in saying this. Why could I be wrong? Because my worldview is evidence-based. I can't rule out, I don't think anyone can rule out the possibility that there might at some point come into our purview evidence supporting the existence of what we're going to call, or might want to call, the supernatural.